Hi class, welcome to week 3. This week we're also covering chapter 3, which is perception and communication. This week we're going to talk about the process of human perception, the influences on perception, the role social media plays on perception, and then finally we'll discuss some guidelines for improving perception and communication. So first we need to get into the process of human perception. So perception is the active process of creating meaning by selecting, organizing, and interpreting people, objects, situations, and other phenomena. Note that perception is defined as an active process. So we don't passively receive what's out there in the external world. Instead, we actively work to make sense of ourselves and other interactions. To do so, we select only certain things to notice, and then we organize and interpret what we have selectively noticed. What anything means to us depends on the aspects of it we notice and our organization and interpretation of those aspects. Thus, perception is not simply a matter of receiving external reality. Instead, we invest a lot of energy in constructing the meanings of phenomena. So perception consists of 3 processes: selecting, organizing, and interpreting. These processes are continuous, so they blend into one another. They are also interactive, so each of them affects the other 2. Okay, so if we start with the first one, which is selection. So just stop for just a minute and look at what's going on around you. Is there music in the background? Are there kids yelling? Are there lights that are blinking? Is the room warm? Is it cold? Do you smell food? Is there muted sounds from outside? Okay, think about that kind of stuff. And then think about what's happening inside you. Are you sleepy? Are you hungry? Are you comfortable? Do you have a headache? Uh, how are you listening to this? Is it, through headphones? Is it through external speakers? If you're looking at it in conjunction with the textbook, is it an ebook? Is it a traditional book? What do you think about the book? How do the colors in the print look? You probably weren't even thinking about any of that when you started. You were just focusing on understanding the content of the information. But once you start narrowing down what's important to you, then you begin to be aware of other things. And this is something we all do all the time. So we select to attend to certain stimuli based on a number of factors. First, some qualities of phenomena draw attention. For instance, we notice the things that stand out because they're larger, they're more intense. We're likely to hear louder sounds more than softer sounds. If we're in a crowd, we're likely to see people wearing brighter colored shirts than, the sea of black and gray ones. The flashy ads get our attentions much more so than the muted ones. We look at, if I'm a shoe person, right? I happen to like shoes a lot. So my eyes go to see what kinds of shoes people are wearing, where other people might look at, purses or, pants or shirts or whatever it is that you like. So that's sort of knowing what it is that we're going to look at. Okay. What we select to notice is also influenced by who we are and what is going on within us. So, when we think about if we just, met somebody new and we're in a relationship with them, then we start noticing other people that look like them. Or if we just broke up with somebody, perhaps everywhere we go, we see our ex, right? This kind of stuff also impacts our selection, what it is that we see. Culture also influences what we select to perceive. So depending on how we were raised, right, that's going to play a role in what sorts of traits we look for and what we find desirable. Okay, next is organization. So now that we've selected what we have to notice or what we want to notice, we now need to make sense of it. So we organize what we have noticed and attribute meaning to it. So one useful theory for looking at how we organize experience is called constructionism. And this is where we organize and interpret experience by applying cognitive structures called schemata. Okay, so we rely on 4 different schemata to make sense of interpreting phenomena. There's prototypes, personal construct, stereotypes, and a script. If we start with a prototype, this defines the clearest or most representative example of some category. So you have these all the time. You just don't necessarily think, wow, this is my prototype for this. But when you have a best friend, that's your prototype for what a friend is. If you have your favorite coworker, that would be a prototype for what is a good coworker. So anybody that would be, your best case of somebody, that would be the prototype for it. We also have prototypes of relationships that often comes from how we were raised or, what we see mirrored at home. That's what our prototype for a relationship would be. Okay, second is personal construct. And the personal construct is sort of like a mental yardstick we use to measure a person or a situation along, a continuum of judgment. So examples of personal constructs are intelligent, not intelligent, kind, not kind, attractive, not attractive, responsible, not responsible, things like this. So this is where, we're sort of looking at how intelligent, responsible, kind, attractive is this person. Where prototypes help us decide into which broad category a phenomenon fits, personal constructs let us make more detailed assessments of particular qualities of people and other phenomena. And the personal constructs we rely on shape our perceptions because we tend to perceive in terms of the constructs we use. So we look at, people like us. I like you because you're about as attractive as I am. I like you because you're about as intelligent as I am. I don't like you because you are not as kind as I am. This kind of thing, okay? So next are stereotypes, and a stereotype is a predictive generalization applied to a person or situation. So based on the category in which we place someone or something and how that person or that thing measures up against the personal constructs we apply, we predict what he or she or it will do. So for example, if somebody belongs to a fraternity or sorority, you in your mind immediately think about what you believe that person then would be. If somebody's an athlete, you have some preconceived notion, if you will, of what sorts of qualities that person has. Think about if you're to label somebody a Republican or a Democrat, right? Those immediately bring to mind certain images, certain things, attributes that you think about, okay? Positive, negative, doesn't matter. That sort of is what it is. Okay, and the final one is a script. And the script is the guide to action. And so this is the sequence of activities that were expected of us and others in particular situations. And they're based on our experiences and observations of interactions in various contexts. So a lot of our daily life is made up of scripts. So it's when you see somebody on campus, it's how you say hello to them. When you interact with somebody in a work setting, it's how you deal with that. It's how you handle conflict, talking with people at the store, this kind of stuff. Scripts are really useful in guiding us through many of our interactions. However, they're not always accurate or constructive, so we shouldn't accept them uncritically. So if you have parents, if you had my parents, right, that didn't know how to handle conflict well, and so every argument was, a horrible yelling, screaming match, right? That would not be the script that you would want to use for your own way to handle conflict. Okay, so you have to sort of know, how do we deal with this? What's my own, bias in this? Okay, so that brings us then into interpretation. So even after we've selectively perceived the phenomena and used this cognitive schemata to organize our perceptions, what they mean to us is still not clear. There are no intrinsic meanings in phenomena. Instead, we have to assign the meanings by interpreting what we have noticed and organized. So interpretation is the subjective process of explaining our perceptions in a way that makes sense to us. To interpret the meaning of another's actions, we construct explanations or attributions for them. Okay, so an attribution is an explanation of why something happened or why someone acts a certain way. And there's 4 dimensions. 4 seems to be the magic number for a lot of things, I know, but there's 4 dimensions for this. The first is locus, which attributes a person's actions to internal factors, He has no patience with people who are late. Or external factors. The traffic jam frustrated him. The second dimension is stability, which explains actions as the result of stable factors that won't change over time. Type A personality, or unstable factors that may or will be different at another time. She acted that way because she has a headache right now. Think about if you have children, right, and they get hangry, or you get hangry, right? That would probably change when you're no longer hangry, but at the time, that unstable factor is that, you're hungry, that makes you angry. I can never say this one. Specificity is the third dimension, and it explains behavior in terms of whether the behavior has global implications that apply in most or all situations. He's a big spender. Or specific implications that apply only in certain situations or under certain conditions. He spends a lot of money on clothes. At first, it may seem that the stability and specificity are the same, but they are distinct dimensions. Stability concerns time, whether the reason is temporary or enduring, whereas specificity concerns the breadth of the explanation, all situations, events, and places, or particular or limited situations and places. So here's some examples of how we could combine these 2 dimensions to explain why Angela yelled at Fred, for example. Stable and specific. She yelled at Fred, specific, because she is short-tempered, stable. Stable and global, she yells at everyone, global, because she is short-tempered, stable. Unstable and specific, she yelled at Fred, specific, because she was in a hurry that day, unstable. Unstable and global, she yells at everyone, global, when she is in a hurry, unstable. And finally, the 4th dimension of attribution is responsibility. Do we hold a person responsible for a particular behavior? We're more likely to hold people responsible for behavior that we think they can control. If we attribute Angela's yelling to her lack of effort to control her temper, we're more likely to judge her harshly than if we attribute her yelling to a lack of sleep during exam week, unstable, or to medication she's taking for a short period of time, which would also be external and unstable. So if we think it's something that they can't control, then we're going to be less likely to judge them for it versus they just don't want to do it differently. Even within this, researchers have identified two common errors people make in their attributions. The first is a self-serving bias, and just like it sounds, this is a bias towards ourselves and our interest. So research indicates that some people tend to construct attributions that serve our own personal interest. So if you took a test and you did well, you might say that you did well because you're a smart person who's always responsible and studies hard. We also attribute victories of our athletic teams to internal stable factors within the player's control, and we attribute our team's losses to external unstable factors which the teams could not control. Okay? The self-serving bias also works in another way. We tend to avoid taking responsibility for negative actions and failures by attributing them to external, unstable, and specific factors that are beyond personal control. So if you failed that test instead of doing well on it, you would say that you did poorly because the professor put a lot of tricky questions on the test, so that all your studying didn't help. In other words, our misconduct results from outside forces that we can't help, but all the good we do reflects on our own personal qualities and efforts. Okay, the second kind of attributional error is so common that it's called the fundamental attribution error, and this involves the dimension of locus. And this means that we tend to overestimate the internal causes of others' undesirable behaviors and underestimate the external causes. On the other side of that, we are likely to underestimate the internal causes of our own misdeeds and failures and overestimate the external ones. Okay, so this means that even if somebody's providing evidence to us, showing us that, maybe something is our fault, we're really not going to take responsibility for it because we don't really want to. Okay, what else influences our perception? Well, there's physiology, which means that, our perception can vary and that we differ in our sensory abilities and physiologies. So when we're tired or stressed out, we're likely to perceive things much more negatively than we would if we were well rested. So think about if you're having a bad day or you're cranky and, somebody jokes with you or, says something sarcastic, normally that you would have some, smart reply back. But if you're not firing on all cylinders, then you take that the wrong way and you take it literally at face value. And that can, cause a misunderstanding. And the second thing is expectations. Our expectations affect what we notice. So imagine that somebody tells you that they want to meet somebody that's really cool. They're funny and considerate and super easy to talk to, and I know you'll like them a lot. Well, in your head, you're thinking, God, they sound really great. I can't wait to meet them. But if they said, oh, this person is so annoying, they were late, all these terrible things, but you should really meet them because I think you'll really like them. You're thinking, why on earth would I want to meet this person? Or think about when somebody takes a bite of something and says, oh my God, this is terrible. You have to try it. Why do I want to try it? You just said it's terrible, right? So the expectations they've set are that this person is a good quote unquote person or a bad quote unquote person. And that's going to influence how we think about them before we've ever even met that person. Okay, age is another one that influences our perceptions. Our experiences that we've had at 20 are different than the experiences that we've had at 60. And so, the way that we look at things in our 20s is not the same in the way that we look at things in our 60s. We just have met other people, had different experiences, things like that. So as we change, as we grow, we have more experiences, both pleasant and unpleasant. And, that impacts the way that we look at things. And finally, culture is one certainly that impacts our perception on things. So if we look at, Western culture, which the United States falls into, we tend to expect things to happen immediately. We send text messages and we want a response instantly. And when somebody doesn't respond right away, we think, what is wrong with you? You can't possibly be doing something else. I just sent you a text, right? Whereas in other cultures, there's not that sense of immediate gratification, right? Family is much more important than the individual, right? So we, differ in our culture there. Another thing that impacts that is social location. So we're affected not only by the culture as a whole, but by the particular social groups to which we belong. Okay, so a standpoint is a point of view that grows out of political awareness of the social location of a group, the material, social, and symbolic conditions common for members of a social group. So this means that people that belong to powerful, high-status social groups have a vested interest in preserving the system that gives them privileges. Thus, they are unlikely to perceive its flaws and inequalities. Conversely, those who belong to less privileged groups are able to see the inequalities and discrimination. So think about that for a minute, right? If you fall in the 1%, and this is a generalization, right? But if you fall in the 1%, it's difficult to understand why it's so hard to be poor in our society. Why does it cost so much to be poor in our society, right? And they don't understand why just saying get a job, get an education doesn't fix some of those things. Whereas when you are in the poor group, you can see very clearly all of the inequalities that exist in our system. But that's where the social location comes into play. Where on that, wealth continuum do you fall? And that impacts how you perceive other things. And the next one is roles. So our perceptions are also shaped by roles, both by the training we receive to fulfill a role and the actual demands of the role affect what we notice and how we interpret and evaluate the role. So think about women tend to fall into the role of caregivers. And it's not because they have such great maternal instincts. It's just because as a society, that sort of is where it has fallen, that, they tend to be the caregivers and, the men are expected to be the providers. But in some families, that doesn't hold true. There is a switch there. I have a friend that the wife does all the traveling and her husband is a stay-at-home dad. And that can make it uncomfortable for some people because they're not used to that role. Think about some professions. Nursing is a great example. Well, it's typically female. There are male nurses, and people look and think, "Oh, a male nurse," because society says, "Oh, women should be the nurses and men should be the doctors," right? So when we see people in a role that we're not expecting, sometimes it can make us uncomfortable with that. Okay, another one that impacts it is our cognitive abilities. So people differ in the number and type of cognitive schemata that they use to perceive, organize, and interpret people and situations. Cognitive complexity refers to the number of personal constructs used, okay, how abstract they are and how elaborately they interact to shape perceptions. Children have relatively simple cognitive systems. They rely on just a few personal constructs, focus more on concrete categories than abstract and psychological ones. And they're often unaware of relationships between personal constructs. They just think, you have candy, cool, I like you, right? You like to play trucks with me, okay, I like you, right? But older people, adults, tend to think more complexly than they do. There's also this notion of person-centeredness, and it's related to cognitive complexity because it entails abstract thinking and use of a wide range of schemata. So as we talked about in Chapter 1, person-centeredness is the ability to perceive another person as a unique individual. So being able to do this, right, dictates our ability to have interpersonal relationships. The other piece of this is the self. We have to sort of know who we are in order to know what our perception is. And remember, we talked last week in Chapter 2 with, the attachment styles and things like that, because all of that plays a role in how we perceive one another. As part of that, there's the implicit personality theory, which is a collection of unspoken and sometimes unconscious assumptions about various qualities fit together in human personalities. So what that really means is, we think that somebody who is outgoing, they're also going to be friendly, confident, and fun. If somebody is quiet, they're also going to be shy and introverted. And this is sort of how we see that people are going to work together based on what our personality is and what our perception is and things like that. Okay, so let's move on to social media and perception. So looking at that, there's three things we're going to talk about here. The first is that our choice of media shapes our perceptions. So depending on what you expose yourself to or what you're exposed to online shapes your perception of events, issues, and people. So if you tend to be more conservative in nature and you follow more conservative media, for example, then that's going to shape your perception of the president, of things that are going on. If you tend to be more liberal and you follow more liberal media, that's going to shape your perception of, the president and how things are going on. Okay. Second is the content of our digital media is influenced by our cultural memberships. So what that really means is that, depending on who we're friends with and what we're exposed to, we're going to look at different things. If you're somebody that's really private online and has a very small social circle, then you're going to be exposed to a much narrower spectrum of information versus, somebody like my niece and nephew who have 1,200 friends or something, which I don't even know how they know 1,200 people. But if you actually were to look at all of that, it's a pretty diverse group. And so there would be a wide variety of things and viewpoints that were being shared with 1,200 different people, right? And the third one is our sense of time and space is altered by social media. And we talked about this a little bit too, right? So when we send a text, we expect to get a response right away. It's just things have changed so much. It's no longer, phones are rarely used to actually call anybody anymore. They're used for so many other things. And this impacts what we expect from other people when we interact with them. Okay, so how do we improve our perception and our communication? Well, first we need to recognize that perceptions are partial and subjective. They're partial and subjective because we can't perceive everything, and they're subjective because they're shaped by our physiology, culture, standpoint, social roles, cognitive abilities, and personal experiences. So something that, as an example, a film that you might think hilarious, your friend might think is really stupid. I'm not a big fan of Adam Sandler movies, but a lot of my friends think they are the funniest things ever, right? It's just, right, different perception on things. Okay, second is to avoid mind reading. So mind reading is assuming we understand what another person thinks, feels, or perceives. When we mind read, we act as though we know what's on another person's mind, and this can get us in trouble. You think you know what the other person is thinking, feeling, but we really don't. Third is to check our perceptions with others. Think back. Somebody's quiet in a meeting. And instead of saying, oh my God, I know exactly why that is, maybe you should say, I think you've been, not participating as much. Do you think you've been not participating as much too? It's important to make sure that you're checking with other people. The fourth one is distinguish between facts and inferences. And in our current environment of alternate facts, this is really important. Make sure that you really know what's a fact and what is an inference. So a fact is based on observation, and an inference involves an interpretation that goes beyond the facts. Okay, so make sure that we're not confusing the two of those. Next, make sure we're guarding against the self-serving bias. Make sure we're also guarding against the fundamental attribution error. We need to monitor labels. Okay, so let's talk about this for a minute. In giving names to our perceptions, we clarify them to ourselves. But, sometimes we label our perceptions. We do this in a way that creates new problems. So let's provide a hypothetical situation here, okay? Let's say that we're in a meeting and there's a group of people that are together, and there's one person and they keep asking all of these questions. And I mean, nonstop. I have a question about this, I have a question about this. And people are starting to get really frustrated, right? They find that annoying. They think that, some of this you should be able to find out on your own. And so, some people label that behavior as, selfish or insecure or annoying. So if we look at this ladder of abstraction and how this works and how that labeling actually creates other problems, right? When we start at the bottom of the ladder, the bottom rung is total reality. Okay, this person asks a lot of questions to clarify because they're having, if we look at a college setting, academic difficulties, and they're worried about making a good grade in the course. We maybe don't know that, but that's their total reality there. They're asking these questions because they want to make sure they have a complete understanding. The perception is that they ask a lot of questions during this, study group or meeting. The label then is that, the person is annoying or insecure or doesn't understand. The judgment then is that you don't like this person, or that they're super needy, or they can't do the work on their own. And then finally, at the top of the ladder, the action is that people avoid interacting with this person, or you could offer supportive comments, or maybe this person doesn't get invited to the study group anymore because people don't want to interact with them. Depending on what our label is and how we handle that, that's going to impact the rest of the situation. Okay, and that brings us to our assignment for this week. So you're going to use the ladder of abstraction to describe the relationships between perception, communication, and action in one interpersonal encounter in your life. First, you're going to describe the situation as fully as you can. Now remember that I wasn't there, so you need to provide enough detail that I understand what was happening. Next, you need to describe the behaviors and the environmental cues you noticed. Finally, identify the way you labeled what was happening and the others who were there. Now consider alternate selective perception you might have made and how that might have influenced your labels and actions. What would you do differently if you were faced with this situation again? Your paper should be 3 to 4 pages. It should cite specific examples and provide a detailed analysis incorporating reading and textbook material. If you use outside sources, those should be properly cited. There's also a quiz this week and a discussion board post. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your instructor. Have a great day.